It was a sunny morning on Earth when the alien ambassador Zorak received his assignment to visit this neglected planet. He had already been to many worlds and was a highly professional diplomat, known in the more refined circles of the universe for his grace and ability to resolve conflicts. But when he received the message that his next mission would take him to Earth, he couldn't help but sigh. Earth? Humans, he shook his head as he reread the assignment. Earth had always been, to him, a symbol of primitive, chaotic civilizations that were merely waiting for progress to be brought to them by more advanced cultures. Zorak was sure this mission was only meant to maintain intergalactic peace, until he learned that the true purpose of the assignment was to evaluate humanity and decide if they were ready to join the Galactic Alliance. Ridiculous, he thought. They can't even finish their wars, and now I'm supposed to help them integrate into a larger galactic community? He sighed as a spaceship breached Earth's atmosphere. As soon as he landed, he was greeted by a group of excited Earthlings. These people, with their nervous smiles and seemingly endless questions, immediately made him even more uneasy. Among them was a woman introduced to him as their leader. Her name was Lena, a charismatic politician determined to bring the intergalactic treaty to Earth. Her eyes shone with an intense blue, and though Zorak knew nothing about human culture, he immediately sensed that she was participating in this meeting not just for political ambition. Lena led Zorak through the streets of New York, showing him monumental buildings and speaking with both pride and concern about humanity's problems. Zorak was less interested in her stories than in how she moved. Her energy was infectious, her natural charisma strong, and he kept catching himself seeking her closeness, though he was uncomfortable admitting it. What a strange world, he thought. Her people are chaotic, and yet somehow fascinating. In the following days, Zorak spent more time with Lena than he had initially planned. Their conversations often revolved around strange human traditions and their unpredictable reactions to cosmic problems. But there was something about her that kept drawing Zorak in. Her boldness, combined with an inexplicable charm, made him falter and hesitate. One night, as they stood on a terrace overlooking the endless city lights, Lena suddenly said something Zorak didn't expect. "You're different from the others, Zorak. You're not as cold as I thought." "Cold?" Zorak chuckled dryly. "I'm an ambassador, Lena. Coldness is necessary to avoid being swept away by the storm of others' emotions." But deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Something about Lena, her independence and passion, made him react in ways he couldn't explain. Soon, they both noticed that their conversations were less about the actual topics of galactic diplomacy and more about their dreams, fears, and the fragile moments of humanity that Zorak had never thought possible. Lena began to show him that Earth wasn't just a chaotic in the universe. It was a place full of raw emotions and unyielding determination, a world that, in its vulnerability, was also beautiful. The question of whether humanity was ready to join the Galactic Alliance increasingly took a backseat. Instead, Zorak found himself wondering if he was ready to rely on something as uncertain and chaotic as humanity, and even more, if he was ready to admit that perhaps it wasn't just Earth at stake, but himself. It was one of the strangest scenes ever to unfold in the deepest corners of intergalactic politics. Zorak, who for years had been considered an unshakable diplomat, suddenly found himself in an almost absurd military council. But the war everyone was talking about wasn't the kind he was used to. This was a war of words, misunderstandings, and, above all, a war of hearts. And right in the middle of this chaos stood Lena, who, as he could never have imagined, led him to a new understanding of the galaxy. It seemed every moment was a dance between seriousness and laughter, and Zorak no longer knew if he was leading intergalactic negotiations or caught in an unprecedentedly personal conflict. "Zorak," Lena said with a mischievous smile as she ran her hand over the wooden screen displaying the latest news from Earth. "You're not planning to keep all these old traditions, are you?" Her eyes sparkled with curiosity and a hint of mockery. "I mean, it's one thing to say we should participate in an intergalactic war, But this, she swiped her finger across the screen, which now showed Earth's giant fleet assembling a strange army of droids and weapons on a distant planet, is an invitation to disaster. Don't you have any better ideas? Zorak sighed and placed his hands on the table to steady himself as his gaze remained fixed on the flickering images on the screen. Lena, you know we're not just dealing with space fleets or military strategies here. This is about survival, about securing power, about the balance of galactic order. These droids, they're not just weapons. They're the future of humanity. Believe me, you can't solve this with a couple of silly questions. Ah, she said, still with an almost playful undertone. I didn't mean to torture you with questions, but you're right. I'm here to understand the meaning of all this. Maybe this is a real war. Not the one with weapons or spaceships, but the one fought with words. The battle that humans and aliens wage as they try to understand the same reality. Why does it always have to be about power, Zor? Why not just pleasures? She leaned back, and her gaze became thoughtful. Earth is insane, I know, but why always this military nonsense? Why not make an intergalactic comedy show that ensures peace? Zorak stared at her, as if she had suddenly inhabited a completely different universe. Comedy, Lena? We could save the galaxy with a joke. He could hardly believe he was saying it, but Lena seemed to be seriously considering it. Her eyes twinkled at him with a smile, knowing her words were pushing him to reconsider his usual perspective on life. Yes, why not? If we approach all these wars and conflicts with humor, we could handle them much more calmly. Humor, Zorak repeated, pondering for a moment. He wasn't sure how to react. I'm not sure that's the solution. Intergalactic diplomacy is based on logic and strategy. It's about power, influence, and control. Humor isn't a weapon. But as soon as he said these words, he noticed Lena leaning back, a knowing expression appearing on her face. Oh, really? What about this? She swiped her finger across the screen again, and suddenly an intergalactic news report appeared, spreading a new theory about what makes the perfect war. A theory based primarily on the ability to use humor to undermine the enemy's morale. You see, Zorak, this war isn't just physical. It's about the mind, the psyche of the enemy. What if you just make your opponents laugh, so hard they don't realize the seriousness of the situation? Zorak blinked. The theory was insane, and yet there was an element of truth to it. Looking at the space fleets and military alliances, he had never considered how much of a role humor could play in destabilizing military power. If you could make the enemy laugh instead of fight, they might lose themselves in their own madness. Maybe this really was a solution he had never thought of. You're a crazy genius, Lena, Zorak muttered almost under his breath. You're right. Maybe we should use humor as a weapon. But that doesn't mean we should abandon everything. We need to keep our military strength, just loosen it up a bit. Lena chuckled softly, but her smile was enigmatic. I knew you'd understand. But remember, Zorak, humor isn't just a weapon to confuse the enemy. It can also boost the morale of our troops, make them see the war differently. Maybe that's the solution. Maybe we need to make people help each other instead of fight. Zorak pondered, feeling a wave of excitement from this new idea. Could humor really be part of waging war? It seemed so simple, so absurd, and yet he had a quiet feeling that Lena might have offered something more than just a fantasy. The intergalactic war wasn't just a war of weapons. It was a war of hearts and minds. And if Earth could use this chaotic energy, perhaps they could turn the tide. Lena, Zorak said after a long pause, we'll try it your way. But if it all goes wrong, the shards are your responsibility. Deal, Lena replied with a wink. But you'll see, it'll work. Humor is a real key. It won't just help us in the war. It might also ensure peace. They stood up, and the city lights bathed the night in a sparkling sea of colors. This was a new beginning, an uncharted war of thoughts and laughter that went far beyond anything they had known so far. And as they wandered the wide streets of Earth, Zorak knew deep down that this was the start of a completely new era, not just for the galaxy, but for the strange alliance between an alien and a humanity that had learned to use humor as its most powerful weapon. It was a strange day when the galaxy first officially learned of Operation Laughter. Zorak, the chief diplomat of the Menzev, had actually introduced a galactic war strategy based on humor. Lena, with her infectious smile and unwavering confidence that laughter was the most powerful weapon, took charge of the decision-making. All the military leadership of the Greenmen found themselves on a giant spaceship, not to prepare for conventional military tactics, no. This time, everything was different. They had gathered to discuss a new plan to win the war with a smile. Zorak, you have to understand, Lena began with a mischievous grin, rolling out a screen on the table that showed the latest footage from galactic battlefields. The best warriors aren't the ones who shoot the most, but the ones who can laugh the most. Zorak, who still wasn't entirely convinced, ran his finger across the screen and began watching the recordings. He knew the decision rested with him, but the plan was so insane that he almost believed Lena had truly fallen from another star, literally. You want us to base our entire military strategy on humorous jokes? Zorak asked skeptically, tilting his head. You heard me right, Lena replied with a wide smile that nearly left him speechless. We won't attack with weapons, but with laughter. We'll take their most serious tactics and flip them, making them laugh at themselves. We need to make them laugh before they defeat themselves. Zorak could hardly believe it. The plan seemed like a comedian's crazy idea, not the serious military strategy the Greenmen had honed for centuries. But Lena was confident that humor was an untapped resource too often overlooked in war. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a way to take psychological warfare to a whole new level. An enemy relying on tactical superiority and military power would be thrown off by humor, or, as Lena hoped, the entire situation would simply throw them off balance. All right, Lena, but what exactly are you planning? Zorak asked, still unsure but also a little curious. Lena grinned again and pulled out a large collection of intergalactic comedy videos from her bag. Watch this, she said, as clips of various interstellar comedians began playing on the screen. Some of the skits touched on the most absurd misunderstandings between different species. Others were completely ridiculous and had no deep meaning. But what united them all was the uncontrollable laughter they evoked from the audience. And that was exactly the effect they were trying to achieve. Trust me, Zor, the enemy will laugh so hard they'll forget they're supposed to fight. And so began the first laughter war in the history of intergalactic politics. The Greenmen, supported by a mix of humorous alliances from all corners of the galaxy, began equipping their troops with laughter ammunition. Every ship, every base now had not just conventional military gear, but also video clips, humorous scripts, and skits that soldiers used as a kind of intellectual weapon. As the fleets moved through space, these laughter bombs were launched alongside traditional strikes, inviting the enemy on a comedic journey that called into question everything they knew about waging war. The first major test of the strategy took place on the planet Altura. The Greenmen forces landed in the midst of a planetary conflict between the Alrans and galactic pirates, known for their ruthless tactics and relentless nature. But instead of responding with weapons and shields, the Greenmen activated their humor war machine. Screens on the pirate ships suddenly displayed scenes of intergalactic clowns dancing in glittering spacesuits, laughing at the failures of previous battles. The Alrans were also bombarded with humorous messages depicting their leaders in the most absurd situations, as if they were stuck in a comedy play. The result? The pirates and Alrans began laughing, unsure how to resist. They were so confused by the sudden humor attack that they lowered their weapons to watch the absurd videos. Zorak stood on the command ship with a wide grin, watching the chaos caused by the laughter attack. I never thought it would be this easy, he said, turning to Lena. She remained calm the entire time, but her eyes sparkled with a victorious glint. You see, Zorak, she said with an almost triumphant smile, the real victory isn't in destroying the enemy. It's in showing them how absurd it all is. When we use the weapon of humor, they destroy themselves. But the real test was yet to come. Zorak knew this plan wouldn't work forever. The enemy would adapt sooner or later, and the Greenmen would have to constantly evolve their humorous tactics. It was a constant game of moves and countermoves, where the Greenmen would have to always stay one step ahead. But one thing was clear. This war was unlike any other. Perhaps it was a first step toward a new form of intergalactic diplomacy. This wasn't the kind of warfare Zorak had ever known, but maybe it was the only kind that truly worked.